Hi, this is Greg Kihlstrom. Welcome to Season 3 of The Agile World, where we discuss customer and employee experience, organizational and workforce transformation, and how business can adapt and continually improve in an agile age. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed in this show, you can go to my website at theagile.world and read my latest articles, or get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile World podcast. Welcome to a special episode of the show, brought to you in partnership with Arlington Economic Development, where we discuss issues related to the workforce, the role of place in the future of work, and the role of the creative sector in a larger business context. We call this Return on Creativity. You can learn more about Return on Creativity and register for our upcoming events at www.returnoncreativity.com. Today we have an excerpt from our July 13 event, Return on Creativity, Return to Work, featuring a panel with Dr. Reuben Varghese of Arlington County Health, Nicholas Gregorios from Avison Young, and Dr. Edie Goldberg from E.L. Goldberg and Associates, moderated by Susan Sirocco of Arlington Economic Development. I hope you enjoy.
I'm going to jump into our next panel, which is about the safe return to work returning to work well. And I want to thank our panelists that are joining us today. Edie Goldberg from Goldberg and Associates, Nick Gregorios from Avison Young, and Dr. Reuben Varghese, Public Health Director, Arlington County. And I'll give you each a moment to tell us where you are. Are you fully remote, fully hybrid? Are you a little bit of fully teleworking?
Well, I'll start because I'm kind of the easiest. So I am a self-employed management consultant. I've always been remote or fully home, if you will, and just traveling to meet with my clients. So interesting, when the pandemic hit, life was no different for me, because this is where I work.
Nick, how about you?
Yeah, so I would say we're a little bit biased given our line of work. So Avison Young, we are a sales, leasing, and consulting firm on the commercial side. So definitely working to get that poll a little bit more balanced. We're mostly back, and looking forward to talking about some of the things we're seeing in real time.
So, Dr. Varghese, you have been on the front line. I've seen the most of you because you are the voice and the face for assuring all of the Arlington County employees during our town hall. So tell us, I don't even know if you are always in the office or teleworking. I just know that you're really adept at telling us what's going on.
All right, well, I have been doing roughly the same practice since the beginning. I've been both in the office and at home, and sometimes it's both in the same day. Part of it is the staff we've had, there are some things you just cannot do remotely. We still had to provide basic services like our family planning services and immunization. So I didn't want to be someone, while I could work from home, I knew I had staff in the office. And so it was one of those things where to show solidarity, to be in the office, to show that it wasn't just for frontline folks. So a hybrid and continuing with that. And so, yes, you're seeing my office in its messy condition and whiteboard wall. That's the other reason why I like coming to the office. I don't have whiteboard wall at home. So anyway.
So I'm gonna start a question with you, which is, how do you see Arlington actually leading the effort to return to work? Because this is a big question, and I think that for employees and for an organization the size of Arlington County, there's a leadership role to be how employees are going to be considering their environment safely. How much flexibility does the government have for bringing people back on? So what kinds of insights can you share that, really positions Arlington as a leader in this area?
Great question, Susan. I think, first of all, we have to remind ourselves, and I don't think you're implying this, but I don't think anyone on this webinar has not been working. We've been working differently than what COVID may have done pre-COVID. Although like in Dr. Goldberg's case, she hasn't changed her work style because she was already able to do that. But so many of us have been working just differently in this. And I think it's an opportunity to think about what are the best things to do to get to what's your work purpose. This would seem to be the time to start reconnecting with why we're doing the work we do. And then let the why determine the how it's done. And I'm going to leave it to others to discuss, like what's the right ratio of contact if you've got a large organization to have in-person contact versus not, because there's no one right answer. And one of the things I think I keep reminding employers and other groups is you have to have these discussions together, because this is not a thought experiment for just one person. Each one of you, when you were doing this for yourself, had to decide how comfortable you were with COVID. And then think about that. That for some people that was easy, and others, didn't come out of their cocoons for a long time. We all had to get to that place comfortably. But now ask the same question for a group. You either did it for your family, if you had them living with you. What about your workplace? And as employers, I think, have a difficult role. Just like I know my county manager, Mark Schwartz, has a difficult role, having to make decisions for a group of people who have different thresholds of risk tolerance. And at some point, I'll show a graphic that I think really reminds people. The multi-layered approach is one of the ways to reduce the risk of exposures, but we also know that living in fear just of COVID is not the only health concern. I use thinking about in the school setting, which sometimes even I wasn't saying it out loud enough. COVID is one of the concerns, but having education and people being able to go to class directly also has an impact on the health of children and other folks. So I hope people take this seriously, that it's a balancing act and figuring out what's best for your organization of people to make them feel comfortable about health related to COVID, as well as the health aspects of congregating together.
Edie, I'm going to have you bookend that in a minute, but I'm going to go to Nick next, because I think that the other one of the other things that we've already talked about between us was, what are the expectations of employees as they go back into an office space? And we've heard certainly stories about what are the expectations that that you're going to be able to have. We even saw an example, just a few minutes ago with the prior panel. It was when technology doesn't function up to speed in the way that we want, so that we can really have a seamless experience, whether you are at home or in the office. And we've heard some things like wildly readjusting spaces. This is your world. Are we all going to have Zoom rooms? So tell us a little bit, Nick, about what that means from your real estate perspective.
Sure. Thanks, Susan. Yeah, and I think Dr. Varghese put it well. I mean, there's no one size fits all. Arlington is if we took Arlington, which sometimes feels small from a geographic perspective, but if we took the actual office inventory, it would be within the top, I think, 30 or 35 MSAs within the country. So it really is a standalone city. And because of that, you see all different types of owners of buildings. You see all different types of tenants and what motivates them, what gets their employees excited to go to work every day. And I think we're in a position where, Arlington's a great place to live and work. But we have been in a position where we've had a high level of vacancy for a long time. When I started my career in research, my superior always said market equilibrium is about 10% vacancy. Since I've been doing this, we've been well above 10%. So we're close to 20%. And what generally that means is if you're an occupier of space, for the most part, there's going to be a building out there that really wants your occupancy, and they're going to be giving you what we would consider in my world very advantageous terms and conditions. Now you flip that on your side though, and it's tough because you may think, well, it'd be a great time to be out with a company right now looking for new office space, but uncertainty leads to a lot of issues, obviously, as we've talked about today. So when we look at what's happening over the past year or two, traditionally in Northern Virginia, renewals of office space are somewhere around 38%. We're now approaching 50%. What does that mean? Really means that people are kind of kicking the can down the road, hoping that there's going to be more clarity in a year or in 2 years or in 3 years, whatever it may be. So practically speaking, what we found is most of the owners, many of which are my clients, these are big groups. They're institutional, private equity, public REITs. They have a lot of money at their disposal. This is what they do is office buildings and fill them up and keep them filled. And because of that, they have a lot of money that they can put towards improving building systems. So if we were having this panel a year ago, Susan, it would have been all about air quality, touchless systems, 13 and so on. All those things have already happened in the majority of buildings that people such as myself work in Arlington County. And now the bar is really being raised because it's transitioning more from a physical issue to a mental health. How do I get my employees back to the office, at least on a certain perspective? It might not be every day. It might be twice a month, might be every day, whatever it might be. But how do we do that? Do we have lots of conferencing? Do we have these Zoom rooms that you mentioned? Outdoor space, whether that's at the top of a building with stunning views downtown, or if it's just a little balcony off a certain floor. We've seen other instances where we have bees, believe it or not, honeybees on the top of some of our roofs producing honey. We have vegetable gardens where, our tenants and buildings can, go out and have a communal garden. So it's these little touch pieces. And being in Arlington County and quite frankly, in the DC region, we do have a number of groups and landlords who continually raise the bar. So what that means is that as a tenant right now, you can check a lot of the boxes, right? In the past, it used to just be about what's the commute, what's the access to Metro. Now there's a whole spoke of things that employers need to be able to check.
Well, you brought up some really important things about and I think that going back to this particular series, Return on Creativity, is a lot about placemaking and what makes people excited about where they are. I happen to know I had heard about the bee the bee hives. I think it might have been a Gensler project, but it's fascinating what's starting to show up. So Edie, if it's okay to call you Edie, I'm impressed that you were kind of ahead of your time, I would say, in a profession that is really looking to assess and help people consider their health in the workplace. So tell us a little bit more about what you do and why your work is so timely.
So for context for everyone, my background is as an industrial and organizational psychologist, which is essentially around the psychology of work behavior, largely work with human resource organizations. I do a lot of work around the future of work. So what does that look like? How now we're creating a lot of flexibility and agility in the workplace, and a lot of consulting with organizations around how to do hybrid right. So this is obviously the right kind of conversation. I love the fact that you gave me the opportunity to bookend these two comments, because when we talk about the health aspects of people kind of coming back to the workplace and thinking about, what people have been through and what their risk tolerance is, we also have to think about the mental health of our employees. And that one is, some of the isolation that people have felt. Some people do want to come back and they want to have community. And for other people, mental health, it would actually be put at risk by forcing them to come back, because maybe they aren't comfortable. Maybe they have somebody in their family or immediate community that is immune compromised, and this would create real undue stress for them. So I think that the last 16 months has created a lot of stress on the mental health of, the entire world, really. And as we kind of come back into this, we really need to think about what people will be comfortable with. When it comes to the space design issues, I love that Nick talked about, why do I come to the office? Now that we've all worked from home, many of us, unless you were an essential worker and you needed to go into work, but why do we come into the office? If I could do my job from anywhere, now there needs to be a purpose to coming into the office. So that what I'm hearing a lot of my clients talk about is the design of those spaces are all really super intentional. So whether it be, I can go outside and get a breath of fresh air, or, conference rooms become really important, not only for having the space for us to be maybe 6 feet apart, to be comfortable, but if I'm coming to the office, it's to be and meet and talk with other people, because that's something that I'm not doing as well, or doing some sort of workout session where we're all working with a whiteboard. But if I am in a meeting and some of us are remote and some of us are physically present, how do I create an environment where there's not an in-group and an out-group? Because you guys all remember before the pandemic happened, you were the lone person on the phone. You could never get a word in edgewise because people forgot that you were on the phone. They never called on you. So we don't want people in the room having a conversation and then having a few people on Zoom who are trying to pipe in. You have to think about how are you designing those meeting rooms so that everybody is in the same conversation. So it was just my way of kind of bookending both our conversations.
No, I think that's really great because it also speaks highly to the issue that Arlington County is really putting as a priority, which is the equity issue in our work world. And you've brought up something that is, I think, going to be really key to how people feel connected to one another and don't feel left out if they're not physically together, and how especially what if they're never in the office and then they're a group of people who are always in the office. So you've given, I think, people here a lot to think about. I'm also really interested and curious about what kinds of things should employers be on the lookout for, because while, as you just mentioned, there could be that lone person on a phone or on a Zoom call that doesn't get called on because people forget that they are not there because they don't see them necessarily, or they only just hear them. And I'm curious about what kinds of things you're hearing from your clients about, or what you're advising them on what to be on the lookout for, because people can be very private about what their anxieties are and what where they feel comfortable and not comfortable. And I don't think it's an easy conversation to have, to say, I really don't feel comfortable with X, Y, or Z. So what's happening on that level of conversation with your clients?
We have had in this pandemic in particular, but this isn't anything new, but in this pandemic, an incredible, what I call a she session. The number of women who have been driven out of the workplace because of the pandemic and the need to kind of homeschool your children or help with the elderly family, all of these responsibilities that typically fall on a woman. And so women have dropped out of the workplace at a rate that we have never seen before. And the biggest concern with people kind of coming back, if you will, is that women who need more flexibility will choose those hybrid jobs or to work remotely. And as a consequence, their careers will suffer because, never seen, often forgotten. And I think it's really important. I talk about this in a number of different arenas. We need to create really intentional workplaces today. We need to be very thoughtful about what we're doing and how we're doing it and what are the potential implications. But if you want to create culture does not live in your building. Culture, being together helps facilitate that because there are social norms that we see and we interact with. But if you aren't in the same room, then we need to figure out how do we live those cultural symbols through other ways. And you can do it, but we have to be really, really intentional about it.
That's a tough one. I think that there could probably be a job for that in every organization, just managing that, I imagine. So I'm going to go back to you, Nick, for a second, as a bit of a follow-up, which is, are there ways that you are seeing any of the companies that you're working with who are really looking to try to consider beyond technology, beyond the sort of physical things that could be in place? I know you mentioned the beehives, but which I still think is a really cool idea. But what are you hearing that, or what are you hearing from clients who say, if we're going to up our game and be competitive and keep a really robust and talented workforce, what do we need to be paying attention to? What do we need to be looking out for? And how are we best going to be able to address that through our physical space?
Well, yeah, I think so. Everything, I think we can agree, or at least somewhat, that so much of this is going to depend upon schools, right? If you have schools in session, it's really tough, or not in session. It's very tough for, kind of the rank and file, to be in the majority of the time. So that's kind of the first thing. And when we're interacting with, people making these real estate decisions right now, there was a little bit of a false start, quite frankly, in early June, it feels like, where some, groups are saying, hey, listen, we want people back to the office, again, within reason. It's not going to be, some of the mandates that were, discussed earlier. I'm not seeing much of that personally. It's more of, hey, we'd like you to be here generally, but it's not, hey, it's our way or the highway. So it's a little bit of a softer message, at least what I'm seeing locally. And I think, what we have in this area, when you look at the macro, stats of things like unemployment, we're back to below 4%, I think, in Arlington County. Nationally, we're, around 6 or even higher. So, macro things look good, right? Amazon and Virginia Tech being here, those were starting to become major drivers for all of the buildings and the projects that I'm working on. But turn it on the flip side. When you had these employers 30 days ago that were saying, hey, I want you back to the office soon, there was a lot of kind of pushback, which is, wait a minute, my kids aren't in school yet. Now it's summertime. I've been working really long hours as opposed to being in the office in the past. Now I'm checking my iPhone and emailing people at 10 o'clock or 4 in the morning, which is not particularly healthy for anybody's, mental or physical health. So a lot of people now are saying, hey, you know what, kind of take the summer and kind of within reason, go do what you want to do. We need to get back into schools, and then we're going to start to reevaluate and maybe have a little bit more conviction or clarity on what return to work means by, let's call it, early to middle of October. We'll see when we get to that point if it's pushed further, but that seems to be kind of the most consistent theme we're seeing right now. But from a hyper-local perspective, if you're an employer, and we're very fortunate in Arlington to have so many of these smaller tech companies that are homegrown, that are growing like crazy, but a lot of those employees are the types of people that larger employers from Seattle are looking for, right? So when we're talking to our clients real time, they're saying, hey, listen, we have to be flexible in what we're saying and what we're doing with our employees. The last thing we want to do is set them off and they go start working in National Landing. So, there's a lot of stuff going on, and there's not a right or wrong answer. But it's certainly, when you look at macro stats, a lot of things in the job market here are really good, but I know a lot of our clients, it's hard for them to sleep at night because they're so worried about engagement. One other thing I would mention, and it was talked about in the panel before, I think a lot of what a return to work means kind of depends on what your role is, right? If your role is more internal support, where you're dealing with people within your organization, I don't want to generalize, but in many cases you can chat real time on things like Slack or Google Teams, Microsoft Teams or whatever. But in jobs like mine, more service companies, financial companies, law firms, others, where you're mostly dealing with people outside your organization, it's a different ballgame, right? I can't communicate with a lot of my external clients on those same methods or channels. So because of that, we're seeing a lot of people that are doing these more external facing roles. Some of them, or many of them, are a little bit more accustomed to being more, I would say, productive when they're in an office place environment, whether that's because of children, the size of their apartment or condominium, whatever it may be. But it's a little bit more of a, when we look at who's coming back first, it's more of those external facing type workforces.
So how is your company showing up as a leader in your field? Because, there are a lot of other organizations, or some others like yours, who are also looking at what is it going to take for us to help, fill those vacant spaces,
Sure.
and really improve. So, you're in a unique position you're very Arlington based. Again, we're looking to show off Arlington as the place that is bringing this kind of leadership and this thought leadership and, opportunities to people who are, from an AED standpoint, relocating or locating here or staying here. So tell us a little bit about maybe your organization's, your company's sort of philosophy about that.
Sure. So we went very heavy kind of data innovation driven a couple of years ago. My line of work, commercial real estate, we're still kind of in the Stone Age when it comes to technology, or we were. So a lot of things were very simple. What do the lease comparables look like? There's a way that essentially all of us look for space online that's kind of like the MLS. But a couple of years ago, we had some strategic, mostly local, groups and acquisitions. And we said, we need to start aggregating all this data, not only so we're looking at from a real estate perspective, but also look at other types of demographics, cell phone pings, where are people moving? What are their incomes look like? What are all of the, different types of retailers that are bringing a true live, work, play kind of environment to Arlington? So practically, giving you an example, we have a building in Arlington where, we're pursuing a group that's not currently in Arlington, they're within the region. And we were able to come up with essentially a custom report that my team and I put together, or I should say aggregated the data for, where we looked at, hey, what is the typical age, median income, level of education for, company ABC's employees. So we're going to now compare that at our site in Arlington next to where you currently are, right? So we can look at that and say, wow, there's a lot of stuff. It really speaks for itself. But as far as having, housing for all different types of employees, whether you're, the college intern or you're in the C-suite. So we went very heavy innovation. And so for example, we're looking at cell phone pings real time. And something that is pretty interesting, and it actually syncs up really well with the poll that went up here right before we jumped on. When we're looking in Northern Virginia at cell phone pings, if someone such as myself leaves my house, if I go to the grocery store, if I go to a restaurant, or I go to a concert venue or a museum, whatever it is, we are looking at about 50% of where we were pre-COVID. So clearly there's still, there are a lot of people that aren't going out at all, or they're not going out as much for whatever reason. But when you strip out everything other than office space is only 33.3%. So 2/3 of people are still not going back to the office. And a lot of our clients are struggling with, wait a minute, half the people are going out to the grocery store, they're going to get dinner or drinks with their friends, but they're not coming into the office. So there's an internal, we've got to figure out, are there people taking advantage of the situation, or is this just going to be kind of a long natural progression of people over time getting more and more comfortable with, where they go out and for how long they go out?
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. So thank you for giving us just that overview, because I think that's really enlightening about what our circumstances look like. So, Dr. Varghese, I know that we didn't forget about you. You're giving you more opportunity to give us some insights. One thing, certainly from your perspective, is what kind of, under the rubric of flexibility, how can even division chiefs and department directors really help with easing the transition back into the office? Because, for almost everybody, it can't be, something that happens overnight. You can't go from 0 to 100% of anything overnight. Although we went from 100% to 0 from being in the office to being, to teleworking, but tell us a little bit about what you see are some of the advantages that the county as an employer is doing to kind of help with and ease the transitions. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Didn't want to cough. Okay. So no, I think it's a great question. I mean, just like any other employer, what will make people comfortable to work with each other? Again, we have to reset that, okay? I don't think we can just say our pre-COVID brains are still there. We have been affected by this. And to a sense, it's a type of trauma. So one of the things that any organization, including Arlington County as an organization, has to recognize people are not all at the same place. And they've been good to understand the CDC recommendations on vaccine didn't say that they were 100%. Some people have assumed that. When you look at the not so fine print on the CDC website, we've always known this as medical professionals, vaccines aren't 100%. So while the risk for serious illness and death has been reduced, that doesn't mean that people can't get infected. And with the variants, there is that equation as well. And so I don't think any employer, including Arlington County, is actually should not be under the apprehension that there are no risks still involved. Mm-hmm. Life is full of risks. This was true of flu, it's true of COVID. So I implore people to be gentle with the staff. Don't ignore the discussion or the elephant in the room. Actually have the discussions and start debunking some of the myths. And one of the myths also is, do you have to be in the workplace all the time together? I think there is absolutely a place for people to be together. And I'm an introvert, I'll tell you that. And even I have been going, oh my God, when I see people, I want to hug them. I know that's not appropriate, but it's kind of like, wow, there are people. How do we get the right balance, as Nick and Edie have talked about, so that you get the intent of the work done in an intentional way? But let's use this as an opportunity to re-examine what we do, and more importantly, why do we do it? Mm-hmm. We need to get back to the why rather than do the checklist sort of, oh, well, we just do it because. As an intelligent community, we should be able to start re-examining the why, go back to the business purpose, and for both the health of our clients as well as our workforce. Because I'll leave it to Nick and Edie to talk about maybe Arlington, but my suspicion is we're more of a knowledge economy organization, all of the organizations here. It's really going to be the workforce is our greatest asset, and they've got to be comfortable as well, because if they're not going to be productive. If they're fearful, how productive can anyone be? But let's put the true risk information in perspective. You can reduce risks in life if you're intentional about it. And you have to involve people in those discussions. And that's, I think, where the town halls that we did and so on, it was one of the ways to help people with the information that was necessary to say, here's an opportunity to try to debunk some of the myths and the fears that are out there.
So that's a really good point. And I'm going to ask the same of Edie. I don't know if it's as critical for you, Nick, but from the standpoint of training, are there, I mean, I don't know what the level of cohorts may be in Arlington that are providing specific kind of health training for making sure that all of the department directors and the division directors have the information and the tools that they need to be able to guide their work staff rather than just relying on, CDC or other outside sources that they've read. Has that been a consideration in the county?
Are you asking that of me?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was asking it of Reuben to start with. I want to hear about your guidance to your clients, but Dr. Varghese, are there efforts underway to provide training for division leader directors and department directors?
Well, I think we've had all of those opportunities over time, and what our leadership has done is they work at the executive leadership team level to talk about the various issues, and so that they've been given latitude, as I understand, because each of the departments, in a sense, is its own business, and the needs are going to be different. So the Department of Parks and Recreation will approach things a bit differently than AED will versus the Department of Human Services, in which I'm in, and we have more people coming in. So I know we have been adopting, for example, and that was because the leadership came up with this. It's like, without knowing what the status is of folks and how a lot of our services have to be done in person, they basically said that any common spaces, they're going to require everyone to wear masks, for example, so that it was driven by business need in a sense, but there wasn't a one size fits approach for the entire enterprise. And likewise, if we pretend all of the county businesses, they're not really one size fits all. Really, this goes back to asking the questions, what's your purpose? And can you get to that same purpose in the safest way possible so that you meet that? What's the right balance between the needs of the organization, the needs of the clients, and I need one more hand, and the needs of the employees? Because you always have to do that. If you're going to be in a knowledge economy or any economy, you have to consider at least those three things, and they're not just one or the other. I'm going to assume the most successful organizations really give thought to all three of those and try to maximize all three rather than, well, just one is important.
So Edie, I'll ask you, is that an integral part of the kinds of consultations and advice that you are giving your clients, which is to have their staff trained to be able to provide their employees with the best and the most current information?
I think kind of relative to COVID, I think the company has been trying to do that more at the company level, kind of what they know through the human resources department. I know a number of organizations who have actually, brought in people from the CDC or from local public health departments to share that information because they're more, trusted experts, if you will. But the idea through this whole process of supporting managers in having the kinds of conversations that we need to have with people today. What are you comfortable with? What's going on in your work? Kind of what's getting in the way of the best performance? What's helping you in the, by being remote, and really understanding that for each person, each department, because we aren't one size fits all. And different parts of your business are going to have very different needs. Some people really need to be on site together, collaborating, working things out. I'm a big R&D center. I'm in Silicon Valley, so there's a lot of biotech here. You're doing lab work, you got to be on site. I mean, that's just that's where the equipment is, and it's expensive. You can't take it home. So it really depends on your work, but those managers really have to understand the context that everybody's working in. And then I do think that when companies try to do a one size fits all answer, like, sadly, Apple, who comes out and says, everybody has to be in 3 days a week. And, the employees kind of got together and said, think differently, like live your motto.
Live your motto. That's great. So Nick, I'm going to go to you just as we start to wind down, because at the beginning of the pandemic, there was an acute attention to social distancing. Even I'm here in the AED office today, and our stickers are still on the floor, what 6 feet apart looks like. And there's, I think we've all probably seen examples of businesses that we are slowly going back into that have plexiglass separations between, stations or between the customer and the worker. Is that something that you see is starting to drop off? That having to spread out further? I mean, we talked a lot about, well, can everybody actually be in the office at the same time? Because we need to, has that all been a little tempered by the fact that more people have been vaccinated?
Yes, I would say it has, for the reason you gave, but also if you think about the, the nature of the kind of the office building and office leases, these are long-term agreements. And in cases, transactions that we're working on, if we have a lease signed tomorrow, for example, the actual company may not move in until the end of 22 or early 23. Oh. So in many cases, they're thinking, hey, I'm not making this decision for right now. I'm making this decision for 1 to 2 or maybe even 3 years in advance. And because of that, we're probably going to be, I think the challenge right now is if the 4 of us on this panel were all architects, and we got asked the same question about what does an office look like in the future, you'd get 4 different answers. So again, that leads to indecision. And I think in many cases, what we're generally seeing are a lot of companies, quite frankly, are still going to be laying out their space in similar ways, but in some cases, they're getting more efficient. And what we're seeing is because of that, if a company goes from 15,000 square feet to 12,000 square feet, they might say, you know what, I want to go to a better location. Maybe in the past, I was 4 blocks off Metro. I want to be right on Metro in a brand new tower. And because of that, I'm willing to, pay up. Maybe there's a flight to quality, if you will. And ultimately, that might be the right move for us. So, it's very different, obviously, than, the residential world, where, if you're looking for an apartment, it's what's today, July 14th, 13th, you're looking for something August 1st, that's a near-term decision. These are long-term decisions, not only made far out, but they're going to be made until, 2030, 2040 or beyond. And that has also led to, there hasn't been as much talk about co-working recently. We are actually seeing in our portfolio buildings where we have co-working are doing well. And we're seeing a lot of groups graduating out of co-working. For the last 18 months, they really haven't had too many people actually in their space, but there are a lot of the companies that are really fueling the job growth. So now they're coming out and they're saying, you know what, in March of 2020, I was 8 people, now I'm 25 people. For some of them, they can continue on in one of the coworkers that we've all heard of. But in many cases, it's time to make that next step and have their own space with their name on it, maybe even design some of their space. So what I always say to my clients is, to the extent possible, if we have the size and the vacancy, we want to have our own little ecosystem. So we're not only, we don't only have the amenities for that are going to check the boxes for the employers and the employees I talked about earlier, but we're also going to be able to help them with their life cycle of essentially moving out of their parents' garage that we always talk about, to getting co-working space, to maybe moving into a pre-built space, which we're doing up and down the RB corridor and in National Landing. And then, further down the road, higher up in the tower, if you have multiple floors, in many cases, we have those as shell space where someone's taking that long-term decision saying, I'm going to build this thing out from scratch.
So it sounds like, and maybe the 3 of you can just sort of give your final comment, but it sounds to me like there's actually maybe even a resurgence of the short and the long game, because most, business planning, good business planning you just have to be opportunistic on the short side. And you have to, at the same time, you have to be diligent about long range plans and how you're going to be growing your entity for the long haul. So would you say that that's something that is really key right now, is for employers and businesses and governments to be looking at the situation that we're in from what do the circumstances look like now, and how can we really hold that thought and consider what the long road is? I'll let you start, Nick.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I mean, there are certain companies out there right now that are a little bit, they're kind of paralyzed, quite frankly, and they're not sure what to do. And, the good news is, in a market like Arlington, there are all different types of offerings with the commercial market. So you can find something for yourself, but you may be paying a premium, right? You're going to pay a premium for short-term flexibility. So, there's an argument to be made that some of these larger companies, we saw with Microsoft, about a year ago in Roslyn, some of these larger companies with more long-term conviction on their business unit or their various lines of revenue, making long-term decisions. And quite frankly, they're getting pretty attractive deals and very high-end build-outs, lots of flexibility in getting out of leases early, quite frankly. So they're taking advantage of, I don't want to say it's the bottom. Whether the bottom is now or in the future or was 6 months ago, we don't know. Only time will tell. But those larger groups and the groups with more conviction, we're starting to see take more decision making than they were 6 or certainly 12 months ago.
That's so insightful. Edie, I'm going to go to you next. And thank you, by the way, for answering the question in the Q&A field. Great answer and great question. Thank you. So is that something that you're encountering with your clients, is to help guide them with that, certainly that short and long-term perspective of how they're moving ahead?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, kind of what do we have to do today? But I think there's also a lot of recognition that the world of work has changed and we're not going back. And so we need to figure out what that future looks like. And so I think, starting to plan for that future at the same time of kind of dealing with the complexities of our current situation is very important. I think one of the women in the prior panel talked about the importance of communication, constantly communicating within the company. I'm going to say what's really important is listening. Need be surveying your employees, understanding where people are at. And, do you have large cohorts of your employees that are just still absolutely petrified about what's happening? Do you have people who are eager to come back to work? I think a lot of the younger people who live in small apartments, don't have families, and that was their social scene, cannot wait to get back into the office. But people who were, kind of balancing lots of family obligations, didn't have to deal with their commute. They're like, hey, this is good. Don't mess with it. So really understanding where your employees are at. And I think these companies that are, saying it's our way or the highway, those are the companies that we're reading about with the massive amounts of turnover. And if you are in Arlington and Amazon is knocking on the door of all of your employees, creating a flexible work environment, it's one of the ways to hold on to them. So if you are thinking about just telling everybody to come back to work, just realize that you have an employer, a new employer who is trying to look for your best and brightest talent. And they are going to take every opportunity that they can to kind of siphon them off. So the environment that you create, which is very mindful of what works for everybody. And this whole situation has really brought up a lot of kind of, you have to meet people where they're at today.
I never thought I would be saying, I hope Amazon's not on the call today, but we don't want them to necessarily take that so hard. It's going to happen whether they're on the call or not. But I'm going to leave the last word of wisdom to you, Reuben Varghese, because one of the things that you actually, I recall saying when we were kind of preparing this panel was, how people are going to engage with each other in the workspace. And you used a word that has kind of stayed with me about describing what that really boils down to. Do you remember what it is?
I do not, so.
Oh, it was trust.
Oh, yes, okay. It's a common word, yes. In addition to what Nick and Edie said, and then actually amplifying it, I'm going to put my health hat on for one moment. Businesses in most of America have forgotten the impact of infectious diseases in our lives. But in the last 20 years, people think about 9/11 being a major event, which is true. But we've had 10 different infectious diseases that have affected the globe in that same time period. So in answering initially that short, medium, and long-term phenomenon, I think part of the business planning for any organization to succeed going forward in Arlington and elsewhere is to keep that in mind. How are you going to think about the infectious disease situations that can occur when you bring people together? That is not an argument to say don't bring people together, because there is no perfect system. How do you create the environments that are going to make it maximally safe or reducing the risk as much as possible? So I think that's one of the first things I want to remind everyone on this, and it connects to that. There's more about business than just the bottom line. The health and well-being of your clients and your employees will go a long way to having a secure, stable bottom line. And that's where it's not just about the one-year investment, it's the investment over time. So, and that leads me, and thank you for reminding me this in some ways of the simplicity, I didn't get to it, is your biggest value as an employer is the amount of trust your clients have in you, and I suspect your employees have in you. Do not squander that trust, because there's something in risk communication they talk about. It takes 3 positives to get back to neutral if there's 1 negative statement. That's a lot more effort. So if we're going to be efficient in the business sector, you don't want to have to do unnecessary work. So start with trust as the bottom line. And one way is, I think Edie was talking about, find out what your employees need. You may not be able to do everything they need, but just learning what their expectations are is a good way, I think, to start building that trust.
Well, I want to thank you all. This has been such a great conversation. You've all provided so many great insights. I really want to thank you all for participating today, and we hope we can continue to keep you as a good resource going forward.
Thanks again for listening to the Agile World podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can learn more and get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, from my website at theagile.world.